and welcome to Question Christianity, where we take tough questions and we look at some possibly reasonable answers. Isn't that right?
Well, that's our goal.
We'll try.
That's true. Tonight, we're back. We're going to be doing something a little bit different. We would love to hear from anyone who's watching with questions in regards to Christianity in general. We're not narrowing things down tonight in any capacity, so we've brought some questions for each other. But if there are questions that come in, even better, we would love you to join in the discussion with us tonight and be a part of this, and just interact with us. So.
Actually, I thought of a way to kind of break us in, if it'll help a little bit.
Sure.
Well, you were probably going to say this, but I'm going to steal your thunder. So tonight, we've all prepared questions that hopefully we don't know the answers to, and we're going to ask the other members. So these aren't softball questions. These could be potentially pretty hard. But that said, for our audience, I thought maybe we could go around, and not that we're experts at anything, but what would be something that you would be most comfortable answering? And I'm hoping maybe our viewers would be like, oh, I got someone who knows something about that. Like, I got a question about that. So, Kevin, what is if someone was going to ask you about something, this, by the way, does not count as one of my questions because I think I know the answer to this one. If someone was going to ask you a question on a topic or two, what would not that you're an expert, but what would you feel most comfortable about? What topic?
Definitely not an expert, but I actually enjoy Bible questions, but by trade, I'm a philosopher. So of course I like chewing on those kind of questions. And also, one of the many weird things about me is I like talking about cults and the history of new religious movements, that sort of thing. So maybe weird by a lot of people's standards, but fascinating to me. So there you go.
Put some rubber to the road. Like what would be a question like a typical person might wonder about that you feel like you could answer?
Oh, yeah, like cults or something? Like, okay,
sure,
was Charles Taze Russell, the founder of the Watchtower Society of Jehovah's Witnesses, was he really into the occult and pyramidology, and how do we know that historically?
Was he?
Yes.
Okay. All right, good. How about you, Caleb?
Yeah, so I share Kevin's passion for cults in particular, but religious movements in general, and for me, I really like dealing with the intersection of psychology in these things. So how human psychology interacts with and influences people in such a way to make the decisions they do, or to become part of one of these groups, or those sort of things, as well as, of course, the Bible questions and God questions that kind of veer into that realm as well.
Yeah, I think that's actually, if I could dare to say so, I think that's a credit to all four of us. Is well, I just know us, and we truly do love theology, like just looking at general theology, and from basic gospel truths to the idiosyncrasies of how that works. I think we all like that stuff. So I think we all like that. How about you, Pete?
I'd say there's a couple of things in particular. One is I like Bible questions and just theology, but one of the things I like doing is hearing the answers that we will give, and being a UX person, user experience, I like to try to take complex topics and break them down into more understandable terms for people who don't juggle theology topics all the time.
Make it digestible.
Yeah.
Okay. Who's going to ask me?
Yeah. Now we got to hear from you, Charles.
Your turn.
I'm like I guess like the cold hard math stuff. It's like I like the solid arguments for if there's good scientific or philosophical arguments for God's existence. I really like diving into that stuff. So evolutionary argument, or non-evolutionary arguments. God's existence is demonstrated by the beginning of the universe, the moral argument, the ontological argument, the historical evidence for Christ's resurrection, all that stuff. Love it. I really, not that I'm an expert, but those would be the questions that I'd really like to dive into. So,
And one other thing I think the four of us can all agree is that we all four have a passion for the gospel. And I don't mean just the westernized Jesus story. I mean the actual good news that saves. And we truly like it's less of our goal to make people believe a specific narrative. We're not necessarily trying to get somebody to agree about the Noahic flood or something like that. Our goal is ultimately to say Christ is real, Christ did exist, and that there's evidence to believe not only that he lived, he died, and that his resurrection gives us hope for eternal life.
Very good.
Love it and hate to see it corrupted. All right, who's going first?
We should have like one of those spinning wheels.
That would actually be that would be fun. That would be fun.
Well, we do need that, right?
We can put it right up there near your board, Pete.
All right. Let's start off on our. Do we have a title for this show? Is it? Are we going to actually name it? Ask Kevin anything?
No,
no,
we're not.
He didn't
I just
know
called it Christian Happy Hour, like when we had done these previously.
Yeah.
All right, Kevin. Let me hear, and you can explain what it is, but let me hear a good, solid Christian, ethical answer to the trolley car dilemma.
All right, trolley car dilemma is if you're in this position, it's a sort of situation ethics trick or dilemma. You're in a position where there's a track and a rail car of some sort is going down that track, and further down the track you can see that some number of people are bound to the track, and if the car continues on that track, it will run right over them. But you not only have this vantage point, but also right beside you is a handy lever in which you can derail the car onto a different track. And that different track has either a lesser number of people on it, or maybe just one particular person on it, or it could be complicated with a particular type person, or maybe innocence or guilt. There's all sorts of possible complications to it. So I call it sort of a trick question because usually it's employed with the motive of showing that there's no good answer. And if there's no answer that's good in the moral sense, all right, then that in turn can be used as an argument for relativism or against absolutism, at least. That's usually how it's employed in, freshman university ethics classes. It's thrown on some unsuspecting students. And
so if I could just add some detail here, because I know you get it. So the dilemma really is, if I do nothing, someone's going to die. So I can stand by and do nothing, or I can take action and lessen the amount of death, but thereby my action is going to directly result in me having causality in that death. So
you're more directly responsible.
Right. So if I don't do anything, I could, by doing nothing, 10 people might die. If I pull a lever, I'm going to kill one person
who wouldn't have died otherwise.
Right.
You found yourself in this situation with an opportunity. Is it right to take the opportunity to derail it?
Should I throw the lever?
Right. Directly killing someone, completely your fault.
Yeah.
Wouldn't happen at all otherwise, but is justified to save it. And if it's not used to endorse relativism, it's usually used to endorse some sort of utilitarianism or pragmatism or some
That's
combination
interesting.
of those. In other words, the whole thing typically just assumes utilitarianism. What that means is that the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So, to put it too simplistically, it reduces ethics to math or
So, and
quantity, a
they would
quantitative.
assume then that it's right to throw the lever and actively
Yeah,
participate
right,
and save.
right.
Okay,
Yeah, you've reduced the number.
I'm not sure that
of
that is the
deaths.
right thing, but I see what their
Yeah,
point is.
yeah. It the scenario, the situation ethics scenario in this case seems to be set up to favor
Mhm.
a utilitarian or
Mm,
relativist or maybe pragmatist, some sort of, in other words, outcomes based, an outcomes basis for what counts as any action being right or good.
mm,
So the problem in ethics isn't which actions are right or wrong. The underlying problem in ethics philosophically is what makes an action right or
mm,
wrong.
mm,
There are three possible bases
mm.
for defining.
I know what one of them is.
One of them's outcomes, right? Or
Yeah, yeah,
just
right, yeah,
outcome. It's the results that count. That's
utilitarian, right.
naturally attractive to the Western American mindset. Results,
Mm,
outcomes, product. We think in those terms, so we transfer that over to ethics as the grounding for it. The other is that it's not that it's the act, but the motive behind the act.
mm,
Right, right. So that's another different base. Okay, wasn't maybe necessarily what happened as a result of your act, but
mhm,
why your moral reasoning for doing it. Sometimes those overlap, but they're often considered different
mhm,
uh, bases entirely. And sometimes the motive basis can be also a virtue ethics or character development. What kind of person am I becoming
mm,
by behaving in this way? Not just the results, but what does this mean for my character?
mm,
It's a very classic Aristotelian
mm.
view. And then there's just a completely transcendent view. An act is right because there is some grounding or standard that's outside of
Right.
me and results in this world. Now, that can take many shapes.
Okay, so am I pulling the lever or not? Are you pulling the lever or not?
Right. Um, if I'm pulling the lever, it's not because I believe that outcomes alone
Uh-huh.
are the basis for morality. The most important thing to say about the trolley problem is that even if I pull the lever, it doesn't follow from that what most
Right.
philosophy instructors claim follow from it. That,
Mm,
oh, well, then clearly you agree that
mm,
utility is all that counts, outcomes,
mm,
results. No, it could be either my motive and
mm.
or transcendent command or
Mm.
demand or standard that calls me to action. That's the main thing I want to say about the trolley problem. It doesn't automatically prove that results are all that.
So are you going to tell us whether or not you're going to pull the lever?
Depends on who it is, Charles.
Uh, who's who's on the, okay. Uh, you don't know. 10 people one way and another, and that's all you know. It's
Yeah,
10 people one way, one person on the other, but you got to actively pull the lever.
yeah. It would actually make it a little easier if you're ignorant of everything except for quantity, because then you can simply say all other things being equal, all other
Yeah.
standards,
Yeah.
considerations, then quantity is a factor, probably the bottom factor to me. But if I was left with only that factor, it would be pretty easy to pull the lever
So would you pull it?
comparatively. Yeah, comparatively.
Uh,
Yeah. Given the stipulations that you just made.
yeah. Yeah. Fair enough.
What if
Interesting.
what if in the group of 10 people, there's one person over here. What if in that group of 10 people you saw a person with a tiny little black mustache and a little kind of
Right.
See,
The kid.
we're gonna have to we have to do a whole trolley problem episode now, because I got this game I play with my kids called Trial by Trolley, where
Okay.
you pick out who's on each side of the tracks, and then you can add modifiers to it as you
Oh my
go.
gosh.
So exactly like what Pete's talking about. Over here's Hitler. Over here's a bus full of children.
One,
And-
or on one track is your child, right?
Yeah.
How many people would you kill to save your child?
Oh,
what
geez, these are
complicates it.
that's
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And you know, that's what homeschooling parents do right there.
I do want to say that I do appreciate your
Make
answer.
you think.
It's actually very helpful to me to see the trappings in that and to disambiguate the motives behind it. And also, I really liked what you said, which is whatever I may end up doing doesn't necessarily justify what the asker may be trying to justify. That's good. That's important. Okay, fair enough. Well answered. I'm going to give you I'll give you a B minus. I don't know.
That means
Well,
a lot, Charles. Thank you.
You know, I think since that was aimed at Kevin, I think, does that mean Kevin gets to ask the next question?
Yeah, fair enough.
Okay, we'll stay on philosophy for a moment. I have my ideas about this, but I actually wrote this. Oh, wait, where did I write it down? I want to read it the right way. So this is a question about the nature of knowledge. So for some of our listeners who know, epistemology is that branch of philosophy which asks what counts as knowledge, or how do we know that we know, just in general. It's a philosophical question, right? Mm-hmm. So here's a question about knowledge theory. Do you think, and this is for everybody, I'm not going to put it just at Charles, although I should, but are some kinds of knowledge claims, in other words, when you claim to know something, not just, I believe it maybe, but if you claim to know something, are some kinds of knowledge claims ever justified on purely pragmatic grounds? And if you need clarification, that's fine,
give me some clarification.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pragmatic means it works. Well, it works for me.
Okay. Here's a scenario. I'm going to answer with a question. Let's say you don't know what time it is. So you want to know what time it is, right? So you want the knowledge of what time it is. Mm-hmm. And so you look at the clock on your wall, which in your experience, pragmatically, has been accurate every time you looked at it, and you've checked it with your watch or your phone, it's been right. And you got an appointment to go to. So you look at the clock and it says, it's 3 o'clock. Oh, I got an appointment. And so you go to the appointment and you're on time. Did you have knowledge? And if so, when you come back home, if the clock still says 3 o'clock because it was out of batteries and just happened to be 3, did you still have knowledge?
All right, that's a great question. It's not exactly what I was getting at. So yeah, the clock could be bad, but it just happened by coincidence to have been right at that moment. So traditionally, knowledge is based on justified true belief, and it would be shaky whether you were justified or.
What if I had never found out that? What if my wife replaced the batteries while it was gone?
Right.
And then I never even knew. It seems like justified. It's always been right. Yeah. It's right when I get back.
Yeah.
But in fact, it was it ever wrong? Was it ever,
right. Depends on what your belief was. If we say knowledge is justified true belief.
My belief was it was 3 o'clock when I looked at the clock.
Okay. But was your belief also that this clock is right? There's
yes.
two beliefs.
Yeah.
The second belief is false then.
Yeah.
This clock is reliable.
Understand that is the clock reliable is different than is the clock right? Because, there's the old saying that a broken clock is right twice a day. So at that point, the clock was right. So he's still justified, quote unquote, if we're just using some of those loose standards.
Yeah, he's justified in his belief about what time it is, partly. But if his belief about what time it is based on the belief that clock is reliable, and that's false.
Usually true. It's been true up until whatever. Well, I guess 12 hours.
I would say you're justified, and so you knew it. Just by the way, that's what I would say. But here's the thing. The example you gave, which is probably more interesting than one I'm trying to get at,
Okay. Yeah. Ask your question again.
isn't one of basing it on pragmatism. All right. So you can justify things based on experience. That's empiricism.
Okay.
You can justify it on pure reason alone. That's rationalism. There are other post-Kantian combinations of that, but pragmatism is simply because
utilitarian, because it works.
Yes, especially for me. Yeah.
Well, is there a difference between just things that are pragmatic and things that they work for me?
No, I don't think so. Okay, my answer is no.
There are things there's a difference between things that are pragmatic in the sense they're practical. The problem here is staying consistent on your terms. It's hard to do, right? I mean,
my answer is no.
Okay. Now that you know that I'm really focusing on the word pragmatism,
yeah.
Are there ever any kinds of knowledge?
Any kinds,
any types of knowledge claims
that can be justified
purely by pragmatism?
So I got a problem with that, because I feel like what you're doing is you're doing something, and you're trying to justify that you had knowledge over it because it worked. But if you don't have, it's the cart before the horse thing. It's like, okay, it worked because I did this, but you don't know that that's why it worked. It might have been, you want your grass green, and you're like, okay, well, I have true knowledge that when I water my grass, the grass gets green. And you water the grass and it turns green. You didn't know that your wife had put fertilizer down 2 weeks before. So I feel like that's out of order. Like you can't really have true knowledge.
I'm curious if,
based on the result of what because that seems circular to me.
I'm curious if just personal taste can fit in that category.
Oh, you said ever. You said, is there any?
Yeah, that's a good. He raises a good point. Pete does, right? When I think what you're getting at is a merely subjective claim, right?
Sure.
So I actually should have phrased my question more narrowly.
I'm ready.
Are there any objective truth knowledge claims?
Okay.
Or knowledge claims about objective reality?
Yeah, because
if it's purely on pragmatism,
if it goes to subjective, then all of a sudden you just get into to pancake mix, which is however.
Although isn't this? Here's the problem with that. Now I'm totally Isn't this like the scientific method though?
Scientific method is a philosophical thought process.
It's empirical though, and things work in that they have a result, maybe not the result that you wanted.
But the scientific method is I come up with a theory, I devise an experiment, and then I see the results of the experiment. And if the results of the experiment coincide with my theory, then that seems to
justify
tentatively validate the theory. Although, again, there could be it has to be a well-designed experience. So, but it's at least interesting because I don't want to. I definitely believe in the validity of the scientific method.
Why?
Why?
For
that is a philosophy.
Arguments. For probability arguments.
Scientism is a philosophy. Scientific method is a method.
The scientific method is based on philosophy.
Okay.
Well, scientism.
In fact, there's actually
only the scientific method is the avenue to knowledge. That's philosophical claim.
Well, I mean, and there's also more than one scientific method. And granted, if you asked me to list them all, I wouldn't be able to.
Right. So, what about objective truth claims? People claim to know things, not physical observational things like what does the clock say and what was the outcome of this experiment. But I think that a lot of people act as if other categories of knowledge, like metaphysical claims or religious claims, so forth, they're free sport, or hey, if it works for me, then that's the way to ground that knowledge claim. That's why I asked the question.
I think
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think psychology is actually a very interesting thing to actually compare here in a sense, because you're dealing with the same kind of thing on a certain level. And yes, you learn from various experiments and use the scientific method to do so. But ultimately, to take advice from any of this, it's based on because it either worked for somebody else, the people who take it beyond just the application of beyond just the experiments and the learning, but actually take it to the point of saying, here is how you use this to improve your life in some way. The improvement help piece of it. How does this help? Would that be the same kind of comparison here that you're seeing with religious thought?
Well, if we're talking about an individual subject and what aids their well-being mentally, I think that's what you were talking about.
Exactly.
Although it's partly objective, it's by the nature of the work that you're doing, it's also subjective in that it's about the subject's inner experience and how that will be manifested or directed, that sort of thing. Also, what counts as improvement or health mentally. Those are valid questions, but it does complicate it a little bit.
Well,
So
I mean, let's say let's narrow that down again further. Then let's look, say, at just a psychiatrist who is prescribing medications for a client, and the result, what they do, is ultimately based on whether or not that medication works. They don't know if it's going to work, but it's ultimately based on whether or not it does work for that person, regardless of whether it's a placebo effect or the actual medication or whatever the case may be.
Right. Now, see, as soon as you mention placebo, that raises I think, the most important distinction to make. When we're talking about knowledge claims and justification of them, what is it that prescribing psychologist is attempting to do? He is attempting to get a certain result, which is great. Everybody's agreed on the result, so that's the desired result, and he gets it. So, having done so, exactly what knowledge claim can he make? Two possible ones. This is important. He can make the claim that this generally works with this population. That's an empirically verifiable, generalization. It's great. Or he can go stretch his neck out further and go, this works because X is true about either the medication or all subjects. That's a different claim. And in order to justify that claim, I think you'd have a flimsy support, just pragmatism of some sort. You see that there's two possible belief claims being made, and which one you're talking about determines which one you're propping up by pragmatism versus solid empirical verification.
Got it.
Placebo, right? It works, but if you claim it works because of theory X, now you've gone too far.
Right.
That's why, like, mind science people believe, okay, if I can manifest my reality. Oh, and I got a job. Therefore, mind science is true. No, that's not why it worked. If you said it worked, that's fine. But if you said it worked because of your metaphysical theory, you've got a lot more support that's lacking, needs to be given.
Interesting.
Your questions are hard.
That's true.
It's done. Well, now it's somebody else's.
Well, I'm going to follow this one up because I think it's an appropriate one to follow this one up with. So this will take us a little more into kind of application of some of this, but it starts off in philosophy. So how do we deal with a lack of epistemological certainty? How do we deal with those gaps when we come on them?
All right. Now say that in plain English for dumb people over here.
So when we realize that there are certain limitations on any argument we are going to make or look at or rely on, while some are better than others, they're all going to have certain limitations due to our lack of information, our lack of knowing everything or knowing all the factors in a given scenario. So how do we actually deal with that from a, I'll leave it at that and see how you guys answer it.
So, Charles, tell me what you think about this as an answer, because one of the things you said a few minutes ago was you like the math of things, and so I'm gonna take the approach that we have incomplete knowledge. There's some things we have, other places we have blanks, and what we might do is say in those blanks, based on the reliability of the other information we have, there may be some gaps you have to stretch across, and that becomes more tenuous the less information and the bigger that gap is. But is there a potentially a playing the odds, so to speak, that we sometimes just have to do? For example, in I want to say it's in the 1970s, maybe in the 1960s, there was a point in time where historians and religious studies people believed that this King David fella was just a Jewish myth. But there was a great deal of other evidence that said, hey, maybe there's a lot of things pointing to, and I may actually be inaccurate here, pointing to that this, in other words, is not a giant gap to believe that King David existed, because there are things on either side that line up. Later on, we found some steel. It was a large, monument kind of thing. Stone that had King David's name on it and other historical information that now said, hey, this guy is real, we can believe it. But are there times when you say, and I don't know that this was the case, but we have the lineage of Israel justified in archaeological evidence up to Saul, and then we have a gap from David and Solomon and Rehoboam, but we then see the historical information pick up with some of the kings of Israel and Judah. So we have maybe a small gap there. Why would we not just go, okay, yeah, we're going to go ahead and believe that those other three folks were there? See what I'm getting at, Charles?
Yeah. So
Playing the odds.
This is actually, I think this is one of the most important questions that we can talk about. I mean, I really think that, because I have heard many people criticize Christianity or even faith in general in sometimes a very snobbish way, because we don't know something, and therefore if there's like anything that we don't know or can't prove, therefore you throw everything out, the baby with the bathwater. And it's so interesting, because I think the way I understand your question is, yes, we do this with everything, and I don't know why religion all of a sudden becomes one of those things where that's out of the park. Like, there isn't anything. This is interesting how it all combines, but there really isn't anything that we absolutely know for sure. Like, there isn't anything, right? And that can go as far as me even existing. I might be a brain in a vat. I might be a computer program. I don't think those are reasonable, but we didn't ask about reasonable. We said, is there limits in faith? So I like to illustrate it like this. It's not whether or not I should believe in something, and before I believe it, I have to be shown that it's 100% bulletproof. And if you can't show me that, say, Christianity or any other belief isn't 100% bulletproof, then I'm not believing it. That's a false way of looking at it. A better way to look at it is, in a metaphor, so to speak, is you're driving down a road, and the road takes a Y, and one is you go right, and one is you go left, right? And maybe you have a pretty good idea. You don't have a complete knowledge, but you're pretty sure that you're supposed to take the one on the right. Although I'm backwards in the video, but whatever. So, so my right, you're pretty sure you should take the one on the right, but you don't know for sure. Does that mean you take the one on the left? It's like, no, you take the road that you think you have the most reasonable reason to take. And that applies with everything we do in life. And it absolutely applies to Christianity and faith in general. It's like, do I know everything? Not, not even close. But I do think I have a reasonable faith. That's why I love that the reasonable faith title itself. It's such a clarifying way to say it. It's like, given all evidence, I don't know everything, but man, of what I do know, and I have looked. It's not. I haven't blinded myself. I haven't failed to look. I've looked, and I can see there's some arguments against, and I see that there's more arguments for, and it seems most rational. The most rational thing I can do is think that this is probably the most true thing is. And like when you, and I don't think it's unfaithful to look at Christianity like that, right? When I get on an airplane, do I know for sure that the airplane's going to get me there? When I step on, is it going to take me to the place I'm going? It might crash and burn. The most reasonable expectation is it's going to get me there safely. And I think we have, and especially when the alternative is to stay in the airport, maybe when there's a bomb going off. I really, I don't want to just say get on and that's your only choice. Like, you're going to stake your life on something. It's like the airplane that's going to fly and maybe crash, or the airport that's got a ticking time bomb set. Maybe you die in the airport or not. It's like, this is a really bad metaphor. I can see it's breaking down. But the idea is you do, and you put your trust and you act accordingly on what you have the most reasonable, uh, the most reasonable belief to do. Who wants to fill in my gaps there?
Well, I think that's really great, and I think that psychologically also people's temperament figures into this. I mean, probably the huge thing you've already mentioned. Some people are just deliberately antagonistic to the idea of Christianity, and so raise artificial and
But it's so
inconsistent
it's
standards that they don't
yes, it's
keep. Right?
inconsistent. They don't
Right.
pull that standard or anything else, including
And,
their own worldview.
and by the way, I think that people who've just even tasted philosophy or psychology pretty quickly, if they're serious, they pretty quickly realize that we don't know everything and can't, and we have this what John Stackhouse calls we ought to have epistemic humility.
Hmm.
Epistemic humility, but we don't have much sort of humility at all in our culture. So that, and unless you've thought about the philosophy a little bit, you're not going to have an opportunity to think, oh, I really ought to realize that none of my claims are just automatically true or waterproof. I can't totally back up anything, but
Right.
it's a spectrum. It's a gradient, and it's like you talked about. Some things are more reasonable than
Yeah.
others, and we can argue what the criteria are. But just the fact that there are criteria for a scale, a spectrum,
Mhm.
right? So William James said, and I'm a big critic of him, but he said that the temperament often directs people towards certain philosophical approaches.
That's interesting.
The tender-hearted philosopher and the tough-minded philosopher.
Mhm.
The tough mind is going to be the ultra skeptic empiricist, maybe by stereotype, and then but the rationalist or the transcendentalist type thinker is maybe more the romantic, tender-hearted thinker. So
Mhm.
psychology, I think, really plays a lot of unrealized role in how people process this phenomena that Caleb brought up of uncertainty. It really bothers some people more than others, and it really bothers them more than it should because, like Charles has said, it's universal, whatever the knowledge field is.
It's interesting that you brought up the personality thing, because I have two close family members, very dear to me, and neither of them are Christian, and for different reasons, right? One is just a can I say diehard atheist, um, and his in some of the discussions we had, it's like, look at a certain point, this would be him talking. At a certain point, you're asking me to leave the scientific realm and make some type of a leap of faith, so to speak, right? No matter however small it is, it's still a leap of some type. And that's what I'm trying to say. It's like, yeah, but everything requires at least some leap of faith. And it's really important to understand that, because even agnosticism can be wrong given appropriate evidence, right?
Hmm.
It's not right. So if I see on the news that there's been an accident on a street, and then I talk to a friend of mine who says that he saw the accident, and my wife comes home and said, "Man, did you hear about the accident?" It's not rational for me to be agnostic about whether or not there was an accident.
Right.
I
Well,
don't
but
know. I didn't see it. It's like,
there's
yeah, but you
also
got enough reason to think that that's the most likely thing that happened.
the problem of, and this is kind of keys back in on an earlier statement of science versus scientism, which is, and the idea that somehow science has this end all be all answer to everything,
Yeah, it
when in
can't.
reality I can't use science to prove whether Abraham Lincoln existed. That's not science, that's history. You
Yeah.
using the wrong discipline for the wrong tool for the job. So yes, there are leaps, but there's also a lot of leaps we make anyway, and then we
Always.
backfill I have reason, and okay, well, tell me about it, and then we'll use again the wrong tool for the job at times.
Yeah, isn't it possible that my wife was lying to me, and that there was a mistake in the paper, and that the cop was confusing a different all those are possible, but they're not reasonably
Hmm.
possible, right? And does that require some faith? Yeah. It requires faith that my wife's not lying, requires faith that my eyes are working when I read the paper. But those are reasonable expectations, right? So it's just really important to understand this is life in every single aspect. We're not even talking about faith. I was talking about an accident. So in every aspect, it's like we make the best conclusion based on the evidence we have, right? And
Hmm.
we are open to having that corrected. That's healthy. We're not closed-minded. And where I'm sitting after looking at all the evidence is, gosh, Christianity seems absolutely the most reasonable explanation of the world and history. Like that's the most
Right.
reasonable thing. Does it require a little faith? Uh, yeah, but not in the way that I think the typical atheist would like to twist that.
Hmm. Right. So just psychologically, Caleb, are some people just more prone to be what you might call just black and white thinkers, like just totally either or, everything they deal with is always processed in these completely either or categories, and that probably would spill over to this sort of conversation too, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. In my line of work, you have to move away from that kind of black and white thinking to be able to see through the policies in a way that
Mm-hmm.
does give gray room, because you don't have a set hard and fast rule for every scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, that is. You guys have given me a lot to think about on this too, and I think it definitely. I think, like you had mentioned, Kevin, I think personality and development of personality and that sort of thing would play a lot into this as well, because there do seem to be certain traits you see with people and how they process these kind of things and how they think about them.
You
Yeah.
know, we being kind of this channel being leaning very heavily towards apologetics, and personalities being what they are. The truth is that not everybody's going to require apologetics or some kind of a proof um, that Christianity is true to come to faith. Um, I believe that at some point in time they will need to develop a level of apologetic in their own faith, but I don't necessarily think they're all going to have to go and become philosophers and evidentiary apologists and be able to take you through some sort of an exposition of that stance. Um, and nor am I thinking that we're going to have to use that on every person. Um,
I'll say this too. I think it's interesting all that we've talked about tonight, because I think a lot of times when one line of thinking kind of leaves off at a certain point where you have an impasse, a lot of times another line of thinking can be helpful and come in there. So, for example, if you encounter it, for me personally, this has worked. But when I encounter something I'm uncertain about from a knowledge perspective, at a lot of times that's when assessing other factors can
Mhm.
become important, like
Yeah, of course.
pragmatism and
Mhm.
utility as well at that point. So utilizing those kind of different thought processes once you've reached the end of
Mm.
one, I have found helpful in that regard. Um,
Here, I'll tell you. So I told you I had two family members. The other one that has like this opposite issue is this view that, so one was like unwilling to take a leap of faith. The other one's like this. It's really what Kevin and you, Caleb, were talking about, this black and white thing. And she said, we were talking about God. She's like, how can you really know anything about God? He's so big. He's so beyond and so above us that you can't possibly, even begin to imagine the fullness. That's true. But see, the category there is, because you can't understand something fully means you can't understand it meaningfully. That's the non sequitur, and I heard that one time, and that really helps me clarify something. It's like, do I know how deep the ocean is? No. I think maybe I've heard it one time. I don't remember. Do I know how many gallons it is? No. Do I know how many fish are in there? No. Uh, I don't know the saline content, but that doesn't mean I can't understand what the ocean is very meaningfully. I mean, we all know what the ocean is. It's got waves. It's salty. I've been to the ocean, so I have a very meaningful understanding. There are certain things that I can know about the ocean, even if I can't know everything about the ocean. See, it's that kind of black and white thing. Just because you
mhm,
can't know everything does not at all mean that you can't know a lot about it, including God, especially because He self-described Himself. Like, there's a lot that we know about God because He's told us, and
right.
other reasons as well.
Yeah, the idea that you can't know everything is not evidence that you can't know anything, and
Correct.
it's
But
also
some
not
people think
evidence,
like that. It's so weird.
right? But it's also not evidence that the things you can know are not. Let me make sure I'm saying this right. It's not. That doesn't mean that the things you can know aren't also useful.
Hmm.
I mean, you can, again, I don't know much about the ocean, but I know that it's salty. And if I want some water, probably not the best place to go get something to drink.
Right, right.
You can know useful things about things you don't know much about.
Absolutely.
Good. Well,
Well,
Pete,
then
with that, Pete, then what is it's your
I
turn.
think I think my question really tacks on well, and it's what misconceptions, and I think I know some answers, but I don't think I have a. I honestly think the three of you would be able to answer this better. What misconceptions does the West have about faith, in particular, what we mean by faith, and what does faith really mean, and what are their misconceptions, and why does that sometimes derail them from trusting in Christ, from coming to the gospel?
Where to begin, right? Misconceptions.
Hmm.
I mean, like, are there major misconceptions? Are there places that if you were going to go and start addressing those misconceptions, where would you like? What are some large categories where you would start?
I think it can go one of two ways. Very often, the way Charles has already described, in which it's seen as some sort of unjustified leap. That faith itself
Mhm.
is always, by definition, unreasonable, right? There's that, but then there's also the problem of categories,
Hmm.
where other people view the category of religious or metaphysical belief as a free for all. You just choose your faith. It's true because you believe it.
It's true for me, at least.
Yes, it's my faith. So there's this over individualizing of faith, and that's, I guess, short answer. That's why I like to emphasize the non-Western aspect of. It's not so much your. I mean, that's obviously salvifically crucial. Your faith, right? You have to have faith in Christ, but I like to put it in terms of being faithful or keeping faith with. Faithfulness. There's something outside of you that you're conforming to, not that you're merely internalizing. Of course, you have to internalize it, but faith isn't just you internalizing something. It's you lining up properly with the nature of reality in your thinking, feeling, and acting.
So, and I'm kind of cheating a little bit because I'm pulling a little bit from a White Horse Inn episode where there was 3 components that they talked about, which was knowledge, having some kind of knowledge, then some kind of a mental assent to that knowledge, and then a level of trust that knowledge is useful or powerful or true. And I think that the West, like we've said, is they look at faith as more of a mysticism of just a positive, almost like a positive, hopeful outlook, rather than knowledge in which I can trust.
Well, I think that's really tied very, very closely to what we've seen in churches, especially in last couple centuries, with this idea of salvation always being this drastic change in someone's life that just made everything better. And all of a sudden someone goes from being in an awful place. And I'm not denying that people have had this, and it's absolutely incredible, the stories that people have of their personal experiences doing this. But the fact of the matter is that's portrayed as being in some circles as kind of the only way someone comes to a position of faith, is through this drastic, life-changing one moment. That's it, all said and done at that moment, and there's nothing else to it. They leave off so much of the sanctification that people have to go through. And I think that ties very, very closely into that, Pete. And that would be what I would say. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is both outside of Christianity about Christianity, as well as people who would consider themselves on the inside.
Yeah, that's the more dramatic conversion, the more celebrated as a testimony, therefore the most valorized, and then the most normalized becomes the standard, right?
Yeah, and if you don't have one of those conversion experiences,
what do I have then? Oh, I must not have faith if I don't have that version of dramatic experience.
Yeah, and there's also, I think, because there's misconceptions around faith, there's also now there, even in the church, and particularly in the church, there are misconceptions of how faith operates in the Christian life. In other words, I didn't have enough faith. And in reality, we're not called to have a great quantity of faith. We're called to have faith in something that is great.
The object of faith.
And that's, again, that sounds like a word salad. And I don't mean it to. Again, one of my thoughts is, how do you make this stuff graspable and understandable to people who are not in the church? And when I look at faith and I say, I trust that God is able, not just able. I trust that God is able to create the universe. I trust that God is able to not just create a person, but also able to keep that person, even when life is hard and horrible around them. God's hand is still strong enough to keep them and to even keep them faithful.
Yeah.
And even when they have been unfaithful, when they have let their creator down, Christ's blood is able to save them beyond that. And needless to say, I think this is why I look at the gospel as such a key component of what apologetics needs to focus towards. Is ultimately, yes, I want you to trust that Scripture is true. I want you to trust the Script, that these biblical accounts are accurate. Why? Because ultimately these accounts at some point take you to Christ. They take you to the cross, and they take you to a tomb that is empty. And I trust that it is empty for a very specific reason, that this God who became man lived, that he truly did live, he truly did those things. He truly died on a Roman cross, not to be pitied, but having pity on us, he died on a cross for us as a replacement. And if we just take him to the cross and to the grave, we lose. But it is the fact that that tomb's empty. This faith that I want people to grasp so much is that he replaced me on that cross. And not that somehow God was going, oh, well, if it hadn't been Jesus, I was going to put you on the cross. No, if it hadn't been Jesus, it wouldn't have been me replacing him on a cross. It would have been me replacing, or me enduring the full wrath of God. So why is faith so important? I need to trust that that sacrifice will cover my sin, will fully replace my sin, will fully cover me. I've got to trust that, just like we were talking this past Sunday, Charles, that wedding garment will get me into the feast and keep me there.
The wedding garment that was provided for you.
Right. That I didn't provide for myself.
Yeah. There's I don't know if any of our listeners have ever not seen the movie, but, well, I think it was even in the movie, but in the Lord of the Rings, there's actually this great scene that's underplayed where they're at that inn when they've just come out of the Shire, right? And they're all having a party, and they're drinking, and there's a guy in the corner that's kind of eyeballing Frodo, right? And he's kind of this dark, shady character, and it's it's Strider, the character Strider, and they don't know who he is, right? They just see him. He's kind of this dark, shady character, and Bilbo, or not Bilbo, but Frodo puts on the ring, and he kind of takes attention. That guy basically takes him out and takes him and says, look, you need to do this. You need to come up to the room. You're in danger. It's like, do I trust this guy? Should I put my trust in this guy? I don't know who he is, right? There wasn't anyone on Middle Earth that was more trustworthy than that man. And so, did they have a reason? Maybe not. But the point is, it wasn't the amount of faith that they brought. It was the character and ability of the person that they put the faith in, right? And, well, I mean, how many times does he save their life in that book, right?
Yeah.
So,
and there's actually instances, particularly in the movie, where the other characters come in not trusting that this person has good motives for Frodo at all. And then later on, they come to find out that this person is truthful. They are somebody in whom you can trust.
Right. And he's the king. He's actually the king.
In that book, he would have been a type of Christ. In that,
I don't think that was a miss on Tolkien's part. So, yeah, the metaphors have been, there's lots of metaphors for that. The metaphor of the ice, which I first heard from Alistair Begg, if there's ice over a lake, and you might have to cross the lake, and you're really super scared. You're inching out, you're kind of crawling across the lake. You don't have a lot of faith in how thick it is. It might be 5 feet deep. And so your amount of faith doesn't make it deeper. You actually don't have a lot of faith, but you're going to be fine. And you could have a ton of faith, and the ice is a 1/4 inch thick, and it doesn't matter how much faith you have in that ice. you're going to die. You're going to die.
Right.
Because the amount of faith has nothing to do with how good the object is in which you're putting the faith. Now the goal is, so to kind of wrap it all up, it's very interesting because we're talking about knowledge. You know, we don't want to have irrational faith either, but this kind of brings us all back and around. It's like we want to have good reason to find the faith to put in the right object. The question is, do we have that? And if so, what is that object? That's good homework.
Mm. Wow.
Nice way to wrap that up, Charles. That was good. That was
Hey,
solid. I feel bad about
yeah.
even saying anything
Yeah,
now. You know,
Next
should just hit
episode
the
is
end
Ask
button.
Charles.
It's making me blush. You're making me blush.
Next episode is Ask Charles Anything.
There we go.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Still
yeah.
got
We
questions.
got some extra questions left
got,
over here.
I was gonna nail Kevin with an old Earth, new Earth question, but I guess our time is up. Too bad. Eschatology.
Yeah, how's
Have
it?
to,
Hey,
have to
Kevin.
have another one of these.
In 1 minute or less, how's the Earth going to end? And
Caleb has already said we've wrapped up.
Oh,
Yep,
I
yeah.
have questions for you as well. So we'll have to do this again. All right.
It's fun.
How about in a couple of weeks we
right.
do this again?
Yeah.
And if you have questions,
Tell them about
bring
the
them in the
17th.
chat.
Tell them about the 17th.
Yeah, so the 17th of January, we are going to be meeting back in person here locally. So more details will be coming on that shortly. We don't know what we'll do broadcast-wise. We plan to still do something, but we'll see how that goes when we get there. But we are planning on returning to some local meetings. So January 17th.
Awesome.
In the meantime, continue to subscribe, like, share the videos around if you think somebody would enjoy this conversation. And please drop us questions for next time. We'd love to hear your questions. Direct them at us specifically or direct them at us in general. Either way is fine. But we look forward to doing this again in a few weeks. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.